A very warm welcome to all of our listeners. My name is Haris Samanovic, and joining me today is Senad Santic, I would say one of the superstars of our growing IT scene. Senad was only 4 years old when he and his family fled to Sweden from Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1993. Like many other Bosnian diaspora, his family maintained close links to his native city of Mostar, spending most of their summers there. After studying information technology in Sweden, Senad lived in the United States for a year, where he discovered his passion for business and entrepreneurship. Upon returning to Gothenburg, together with some of his professors, he started a company to develop a mobile application for local schools. But his impact didn't stop there. He didn't wait for a long time to come back to his homeland and try to make a business impact. Eventually, I think he provided even more than that by providing numerous business opportunities for professionals and opportunities for youth. In 2016, he co-founded ZenDev, an IT consultancy company that burst onto the scene and has only grown exponentially since, becoming one of the most recognizable names in the country. They specialize in e-commerce and web and mobile solutions, and their clients include the likes of Emerson Electric, Volvo, and Ericsson, just to name a few. If you follow Senad on social media, you could also witness the effort he invests in inspiring the youth, promoting local businesses, and advocating for initiatives that can have a far-reaching positive effect on our country. I'm really excited to have Senad today here to talk about ZenDev's success story and what the future has in store for them and the industry overall. So welcome, Senad, to the podcast.
No, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the, I must say, very flattering introduction. If nothing else, thank you.
Knowing what you do and our foundation cooperating very closely with ZenDev for some time, I know a bit about your efforts. And I really appreciate them. And let's put them out there. When it comes to founding your own company, ZenDev in this case, there must be a background story, right? You probably told it 100 times, but I'm pretty sure our listeners would enjoy hearing it. Can you provide us a bit more context of how it all came to be and how was ZenDev founded?
I would say from interested in entrepreneurship, even before I knew that it was called by the term of entrepreneurship. So I always liked the idea of creating, let's say, something out of nothing from an idea from scratch. And I really love the process of that creative outlet that it basically gave me. So even when I was 12 to 14 years old, I started creating my first websites, obviously with no ambitions of profits at that age, but it certainly went in that direction. So yeah, I grew up in Sweden the bigger part of my life. And when it came time to college, I decided that I want to continue in the direction of IT. And as soon as I started that, it kind of went against my philosophy that I wanted to be kind of like a person that had full creative control of the things that I was working on, right? So I kind of feel like I finished college only to have a backup plan if my businesses didn't work out. So as soon as I started at college, I started my first business and I started creating these websites on the side with the ambition to start creating some passive income. So that started very early on, that ambition. And like you mentioned there, I went to the United States and lived for a year in San Francisco. And for the people that don't know, San Francisco is just a bit north of Silicon Valley, which is kind of like tech mecca in the world. And it's a very inspiring place to be for a year and see the kind of businesses that are being created there. And I felt like even though I had already created a business on the side which I could live off of, all of a sudden it felt quite small when I compared it with what people were doing on a broader scale in the United States. So I decided that when I came back to Sweden, I would study 2 more years. So I studied entrepreneurship and business design. So I got my master's in that. And it was a part of that education that my professor at college contacted me and asked me to then, after the education, start a company with him for a few years. So entrepreneurship in one way or another has always been a part of my life. And about 3 years into this company where we're creating the mobile apps for the schools, I was working primarily as a backend developer there. That is a company that's still up and running. But for me, after 3 years, I feel like I had kind of reached on the tech side what I had to learn there, and it started becoming a bit monotonous. And at that point, I started thinking about what other alternatives I had in life. And I always enjoyed my summers very much in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I was kind of like at a crossroads. So I spoke to my brother who had already moved back to Bosnia and Herzegovina, and he said that he loved his life here. He said, like, I'm an economist, you're in IT, it should be very easy for you to find a way to work towards Sweden from Bosnia and Herzegovina. So 2016, I decided that I wanted to make that move as well. And then I spoke to my lifelong friend, Nikola Mirkovic. He has roots from the Balkans as well. His dad is from Montenegro. And I suggested that we create ZenDev, a company where I would move to Bosnia and Herzegovina, and he would stay in Sweden, and I would try to find some group of people to do any kind of work, basically in IT consulting for Sweden. So there were no grand visions early on. In a lot of ways, it was a selfish decision in the sense that I wanted to try out life in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Then after a few years here, you start understanding the problems on a local level, and that's why I felt like I had to get involved to see what we can do on our scale. Thankfully, the business is growing great. We're steadily growing, but we started thinking, at least I started thinking more of a bigger picture here. What are the lowest hanging fruits of impact, not just for my own company, but the region as a whole?
So it's not only that you started a company, you started a company in a whole different country. Yeah, I know you are connected to Bosnia and Herzegovina, you had experience traveling back, but it must have introduced some things that you were not expecting. I mean, it's a whole different set of variables, right? Has there been any surprises or challenges that you have encountered or your company has encountered and how did you tackle them at the time?
Yeah, I would say that basically more or less from day one, I had a reality check that I did not know how to run a consultancy business. Like I had done development a lot. I had the startup in Sweden and so on, but I had never worked for a consultancy company. I had never been a consultant myself. So it was ironic that the first thing that I did in Bosnia and Herzegovina perhaps was to start a consultancy. And it was brutal. And in a way, we were naive, Nikola and myself, in thinking that this would be pretty straightforward. And very soon we realized that this was going to be a bit harder than we thought. But I also knew that it was going to be like that. And I'm kind of always a person to go into things half ready. And I think that that's the way that you need to approach things in life. Don't wait until you're completely ready, because then oftentimes it'll be too late, basically. So I knew that the first year would be brutal, and it was in every aspect. So it was very tough for me, mentally taxing, in the sense that every single thing that I did in the company, I felt very insecure and very inadequate. But I was also to some extent prepared that my first year was going to look like that in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I made a decision for myself that no matter how I feel during the first 12 months, I have to stay and stick it out, basically, because otherwise there's a chance that I take a decision when I'm on a low, or even a decision when I might be on a high as well. So I knew that I had to stick it out, and just like I thought of it, it would be easier with time, and it really felt like that. The first year was really tough. The second year was just tough. And after that, it's like, it is always tough and it's always challenging, but not in the same way that it was those first 2 years. At least now I feel like we know in which direction we're going. We have a vision. A lot of things have been laid out. There's not so many of these unknowns that were there for the first year. That we had to learn everything about, pricing, negotiations, everything from scratch. So it was tough, but it's not, when people say because you moved to Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's not Bosnia and Herzegovina that was like, if we're talking about the problem, it's the work that we were trying to do during that first year that was very tough. Bosnia was great.
Okay, that's nice to hear. Hopefully others get inspired by that and can start a business, at least if they know how to run a consultancy, or if they don't, that's still okay. They can learn it. They can learn it. You're talking about being in a situation where you guys now know where you're heading. So I'm sure that, I assume that you have a big part in making that vision. So what did you take into account when thinking of where the company can be in 5 to 10 years? Like, what challenges are you guys expecting, and what things are you expecting that you have to prepare for?
That's a great question, and we think of it constantly. I think when we first moved here, when you don't have a clear idea of the landscape in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's tough to set out your own vision, because you don't know if there might be already 4 other companies doing the same thing here in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So we tried to learn as much as we could about the industry for the first, I would say, 2 years before we started setting out any specific visions. And I would say that to anybody starting out, like, don't talk too much about visions very early on. Early on, it's just sales and doing the work, in whatever it is that you're trying to deliver. The vision that came out of all of this was just by analyzing what's happening in the local market. So 95% of the IT industry in Bosnia and Herzegovina is in one way or another outsourcing. And to a large extent, that is still what we are doing as well. But there's an issue in that in its entirety, we aren't necessarily taking the entire industry forward by doing that, because the amount of people in our local market in IT is probably 5,000 to 6,000 people in the entire country. So it's not a huge number. There are companies that are bigger in most countries basically. And then it's a question of, with these 5,000 or 6,000 people, what's the best way to make use of those resources, right? And if we're all selling people by the hour, what eventually happens is that we're just spinning these same people in the market between these different companies and all selling them by the hour, which is not optimal, not for the companies themselves, but also for the entire industry to start moving forward. And the way that we thought about it was then thinking, why are there not more product companies being started or products being created in general in Bosnia and Herzegovina? I spoke to a few of the incubators and accelerators here in Bosnia and Herzegovina and talked to them, and it seemed that there were two things that were missing. On one hand side, it was the overall knowledge of how to build business, because if we've been doing outsourcing for the past 20 years, it means that the business development was always done somewhere else. So it was done in Germany, Sweden, the United States, Switzerland, and so on. And then we would get the tech side to do. And obviously that made great IT developers of us, but not necessarily great business people, because we didn't get that experience. So that's one hand side, that there's a lack of knowledge. So the way that we try to attack that in our company is just by internal educations, to teach everybody in our company about business. Some people a lot, like your product managers, your business developers, have to know a lot. But even our developers, the people that do QA, we do some business education for them as well, because everybody has to know what it is that we as ZenDev offer on the consulting side of things. And the reason that we started focusing on delivering that as a consulting service as well was because eventually we wanted to move towards the other track where we start creating our own products. And the idea is that if we know how to do this towards our clients, then we're going to know how to do this internally as well, right? If one thing that was missing was the business know-how, the other thing that was missing was the access to other markets. So it's very tough to sell something out of Bosnia and Herzegovina to, I don't know, Great Britain or to Sweden or to the United States if you don't have those connections. So we figured that what we want to do out of ZenDev is kind of create the closest thing that you can to creating your own company, but not actually have to take that entire risk. And at the same time, get all of the connections that ZenDev had over time has built up and all of the know-how in business. So the idea and my ambition with this is that eventually we are going to have people that come through that stream of what ZenDev is doing, and maybe leave ZenDev and then start their own companies where they're actually trying to create their own products. I would be very proud if 5 years from now we could say that we have people that are alumni of ZenDev that went on and started their own products. And I think that the country as a whole in the IT sector is kind of at the tipping point that we're starting to create our own products and moving away, not entirely from outsourcing. There's nothing wrong with outsourcing, but that we need more products to be created as well. So that's kind of the vision and mission, to take the entire industry more in that direction.
Very interesting that you say that it's even being proud of people who would make that next step, because sometimes there is entrepreneurship, and the entrepreneurship, I guess some of them will feel like they can do it at ZenDev. Some of them might feel that they want to go in a different direction. Have you had something like that happen already?
We have had a few cases on a smaller scale. We've had a few people that left and started their own products and companies around those products as well. I can specifically think of one fellow that used to work a few years with us, Anin Salchin. And when he came to me first with this idea, I think he was kind of unsure of how I would react to it, because he figured, that I'm going to question him in the sense that now you want to leave the company and ask for advice. But I was really happy for him that he wanted to take that next step. And I sat down with him for an hour to analyze, his business model, the idea that he had, and give him any kind of tips, and told him basically that the door is open whenever he needs advice on whatever it is that he's doing. So it started a little bit. Obviously, building companies and building product takes time, so you're going to have to expect that it's going to take 3 to 5 years. So I expect and hope in the future that we're going to see more of that.
Have you ever had any ideas about what other industries might be very interesting for software, or at least software companies from Bosnia and Herzegovina to penetrate into? Maybe it's already common knowledge somewhere else, but we are not really doing it, and there's an opportunity there.
So you're thinking of the idea of taking some software ideas that are already available and implementing them in our local
Either that, or for example, I've heard about an interesting company that implements software in like electricity grid management. So using a bit more advanced technologies in managing that more efficiently. So it's a well-known thing in the world, but I'm pretty sure that we are not doing it here.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think what people want to start with here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, or just generally the digitalization, there are so many things that are already out there, and in a lot of ways, it allows us to leapfrog some technology steps that have been taken in other countries. So we can jump from, you know, maybe what Sweden was doing 10 years ago, but all those steps in between, in a sense, we can jump all those steps and do a leapfrog to whatever it is that they're doing today. We just need, basically, I think, on the governmental level, the country to work with us here in that direction to start to implement those things. I think the problem why we haven't gotten enough IT locally is because the buying power hasn't quite been there. I know that companies like, and I'm a big fan of BB and companies like that, that are actually implementing things that are available abroad and then taking it to our markets here. I think that's been the primary thing that's kept people away, thinking that, you know, maybe the buying power isn't here. But at the same time, the best way to approach that, I think, is not think of the small things that were implemented, I don't know, in the United States or Sweden, but rather think of the biggest ideas that made the biggest businesses. You know, if that made a multi-billion-dollar company in Sweden, then certainly that there must be enough of a market for that in our local region to make a great company out of that. So yeah, take the big things, I would say, that are very available and start working on them here in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Yeah, I think that's another interesting point you made. So I think with that, we are close to ending our interview for today. It was really an enjoyable, short, but a very enjoyable experience talking to you, Sana. We're going to be seeing each other at the Futures Leader Summit, right?
Yes, thank you so much for the time. It was a pleasure, Haris. And yeah, I absolutely look forward to the Future Leader Summit. I was there last year as well. And I remember when it was Valeria from our company that asked me if I could join that. And I remember like, oh, how am I going to take 2 days out of the schedule and be with the youth? And I just remember having a ton of things to do at work. But when I went there and when I did it, when I was with the youth, I got so much energy and so much out of it, because it, you know, if they had some inspiration, I got some inspiration in the other direction as well. And then when I came back to work, I got another, like, yeah, I got great energy from the youth, basically. So I'm really, really looking forward to it this year as well.
Yeah, we are very glad to have you as well. So thank you, Senad, once again. Wishing you a nice day.